Well, draft season, if it's not here, it's certainly coming. John Schmeelk, Tony Pauline with you. It's all brought to you by Tommy Hilfiger, a PVH brand and an official partner of the New York Giants. And again, this is not a Giants podcast. This is a draft podcast, despite the background and the sweatshirt. And we are getting hot and heavy here with the draft coming, Tony. We've had all the major bowls. We've had the first round, the semis, whatever you want to call it, of the college football playoffs. And more declarations. The picture of what this draft is going to look like is becoming much clearer by the day.
And really some great performances from some standout players. And there were other highly rated players who had marginal performances in the game. So, obviously the talk is going to be about CJ Stroud with his performance. How high is he going to jump up? I mean, we saw a lot of real good college football Friday and Sunday, and even in the lead up to the college football semifinal games.
Yeah, so why don't we start with the college football playoffs, because I do think that's the big story, Tony. We'll look ahead to the championship, and then we'll kind of run through the other bowls as well. We've had a bunch of Alabama declarations, some more underclassmen coming out, another big one from Clemson as well. So a ton to talk about. So let's get to Ohio State and Georgia first, because I do think that's the big story. I think you hit it. And, we've talked about CJ Stroud on this program over the course of the year, and I described him as a paint by numbers quarterback, which was not meant to be insulting, but, he runs the offense very well. He's extremely accurate. I think that's his best trait as a quarterback. But we saw him do some stuff against the best defense in college football, at least a lot of people think it is, off kilter, get rushed, has to move, creates plays with his legs, throws on the move. He did some things that I don't think we've seen him do a ton of in this game, and it was very impressive. And I think he probably solidified himself at minimum top 10, probably as a top 5 pick with that performance.
I'm not going to go that early. Let me start off by saying, I really don't like basing a draft grade on a player off of one game.
Oh, no, you can. Absolutely.
There's a lot of dangers. I'm going to make a slight exception for CJ Stroud, and here's why. If you go back to the show that we did after the Michigan game, and I was criticizing CJ Stroud, I said part of the problem, or a major part of the problem, is the Ohio State coaching staff who doesn't let him run the game. If you look the past 2 years, CJ Stroud is consistently coming to the line of scrimmage, getting behind center, and he's looking at the sidelines. And the play clock is running down, 5, 4, and he's looking to the sidelines for instruction. They didn't do that in this game. They let CJ Stroud run the offense. They let CJ Stroud play. They let CJ Stroud basically be CJ Stroud. And he was phenomenal. I mean, he was outstanding. I think what bothers me most is this is probably the CJ Stroud that we should have seen the past 2 years, but the Ohio State coaching staff kept such tight reins on him, they didn't allow him to develop. So, I think you have to put a lot of credence and a lot of credibility into this performance, because basically it was unfettered. It was the Ohio State coaching staff let him loose. Let's not forget, remember, Justin Fields also had a phenomenal semifinal college football game against Clemson, which really boosted his draft stock. This was the CJ Stroud that I expected to see coming into the season. And I think it's as much the fault of the Ohio State coaching staff that it took basically this final game against Georgia and these semifinal players to see the guy that many of us have been hoping and expecting to see.
It's Tony. It's funny. A lot of guys get tight in these big games, right? CJ Stroud looked loose. Like he looked as relaxed and fluid and just playing the game and letting it come to him and reacting off platform stuff. Oh, the stuff we've been waiting to see. And the accuracy didn't go away, right? He had those 2 big throws on the move that were accurate after avoiding the rush. And look, he showed athleticism too, right? He ran the football, which is something we hadn't seen a ton of this year. So I thought all the stuff that we were worried about, and it's just one game, you're 100% right. But he, I think, showed the critics and doubters the stuff that you're worried about. Look, I can do that stuff too. I just haven't done it yet.
And you remember, you talk to scouts, and they base, when they scout a player, they're like, what can he do? What does he do well? And CJ Stroud, you talked about running the ball, getting outside the pocket with ease, keeping his eyes downfield, and getting the ball downfield. Now, he still has a ways to go. There are a couple of throws that he missed. If you remember, he missed that one sort of intermediate pass where he had to just drop it into the receiver, where the safety was behind the receiver, the cornerback was in front of the receiver. He missed it badly. Stetson Bennett did make that throw during the winning drive. So, there's still some things he's got to work on. But yeah, I mean, again, it's maddening. It angers me because this is the guy that we should have really seen from September, October, November on. And I think that scouts are going to ask a lot of questions. Why did you play like this against Georgia? What happened against Michigan? Why were there so many close contests? What happened against Maryland? And it'll be interesting to see, how that evaluation goes.
All right, a couple other matchup in this game I want to talk about. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr., Tony, not eligible for this year's draft class. You can, I don't know if you want to use a pen if you can, but you can, whatever you want to use, top 10 pick 2024, put it in whatever you want to put it in. Awesome. But, he went up against Kelee Ringo, who's a guy a lot of people are projecting as a top 10 pick this year. And I get it from a trait perspective, right? He's big, he's strong, he's fast. But, boy, guys get open on him.
Yeah.
They get open on him a lot. And isn't that kind of the point of the whole thing?
First of all, that game changed on a dime when Marvin Harrison Jr. went out. I mean, that was the turning point in that game. And you're right about Ringo. Ringo did have a couple of nice plays down the stretch when they needed him. But even the announcers, if you watch the game, we're talking about, there are constant slip-ups with Kelee Ringo. I said in my write-up, the preview I did of this game at Pro Football Network, a lot of people like him as a lock first-round choice. I don't know. I don't agree. The game film that I see on Kelee Ringo is day 2. He could go late day 1 because he's got the great length, because he's got the athleticism, because he's explosive, because they see so many flash plays that he makes that they feel they can turn it into consistent production. But lapses at the cornerback position from a rookie or from a guy going to leave can be very, very dangerous. That is a major red flag. And it's not just the game against Ohio State.
Guys have gone behind him all year, man.
We've seen that from Ringo throughout the season. So I think what happens is people get all overexcited when they see some of these great highlight films. But really, when you dig deep into the film, the overall body of work for Kelee Ringo, there are some red flags. There are some things you got to be concerned about.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, let's go to another defender on the Georgia side of the ball. Jalen Carter, the numbers do not jump off the page. He did not dominate the game, which is something you expect from a guy that's talked about as a top overall pick. I still thought he was active. He got in the backfield. He made Stroud, scramble a couple times. And again, that's not being, the dominant first overall pick guy I think people are looking for. But let me put it this way. What I saw from Jalen Carter did not make me, rethink the fact that he's going to be one of the first 3 or 4 guys taken in the draft.
I sort of agree with you, but I also think you got to give credit to Ohio State center Luke Whippler, who I spoke about in the last program, who I think is a lot of people like the Georgia center to be the number 1 center if he declares for the draft, which I think he's going to. I'm told that Luke Whippler is very close to declaring for the draft. And if he's not the first center selected, he'll be the second center off the board somewhere in the beginning part of round 2. I mean, Whippler, he slowed down the domination, the potential dominating effect of Jalen Carter, who a lot of people think will be the highest rated player as we move towards the draft. And I was talking to somebody in the league about this, and I said, I like Whippler's play a lot against Georgia. I said he didn't dominate the way he did against Benton of Wisconsin, who's a highly rated defensive tackle, but I thought he played well. And the response was, look, he was playing against potentially the number 1 pick of the draft in Jalen Carter, and he didn't control him, he slowed him down. So I can understand why you like Jalen Carter. I just thought that Luke Whippler, the center from Ohio State, I thought he was terrific.
Yeah, Tony, I think both things can be true. I think Carter was active. You're never going to shut down a guy that's talented for a whole game and, keep him out of the backfield. But look, Whippler did a nice job. And the fact that, going into this game, if I told you that, would you have thought Ohio State would put up that many points? And, I didn't. And you can't do that unless your offensive line does a really nice job against a really good front.
And it was basically Ohio State's defense inability to stop Georgia the last 5 minutes of the game, which is why they are not playing in the national championship game. That and a bad missed field goal, but still they had a 13-point lead with 5 minutes left. You got to be able to slow down the opposition, and they didn't.
100%, I'm with you. One more Georgia player I want to hit on. Broderick Thomas. I don't think we've talked about him yet, Tony. Georgia's left tackle. Your thoughts on him, how he played, and generally overall, how scouts are looking at him for the 2023 draft.
Yeah, I'm told he is going to enter the draft. I don't know that he's officially entered the draft. He's very active. He's very athletic. The question with him is, what are his measurables? Is he going to be 6'4"? If he's not 6'4", is he a left tackle or is he a guard? Jones right now is on my guard board.
Oh, really?
I see what the actual measurables are. Sometimes, there are only some teams that'll put a guy at left tackle if he's 6'3.5", 6'3". Got to see what Jones is. I thought he played relatively well.
Arm length too is big there, right? The arm length.
Exactly. Of course, you want those arms to be at least 33 inches. Some teams want them at least 33.5 inches. He went up against Zach Harrison, and Harrison is a real good football player. He's smart. He's tough. He gets the most out of his ability. He's got a long, lanky build. He's just got to add some bulk to his frame to complete his game. But he's someone who finds ways to make plays. Did it against Georgia, whether it was defending the run, batting away passes, getting some pressures. He's done that all season long. One guy I think we need to talk about is Paris Johnson.
Oh, Paris next on my list.
It's very interesting when you watch Paris Johnson. What you saw from Paris Johnson against Georgia is basically what I watched all year long when I really broke down the film, and I did my Big Ten film work last week. And he's an enigma of sorts in the sense that you watch him as a run blocker and he dominates opponents. He'll knock him off the line. He'll knock him on the backs. He gets out to the second level. Yet he doesn't show that strong anchor in pass protection, as you saw during the Georgia game when he got pushed back into the pocket and they got to C.J. Stroud, the redshirt freshman. So I don't know if it's an issue of, I think he's got the strength, but this is his first year at left tackle. He just has to learn to use that anchor to block with leverage and hold the point in pass protection. Tells me that there are going to be some bumps in the road as far as Paris Johnson is concerned, being a left tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I know people love his potential, Tony. I think there'll be a debate if he's going to be the first offensive tackle off the board or not when we get to the draft. Everyone will try to get those tackles early in these draft classes. You mentioned Johnson. Let's jump back to Georgia then. We haven't talked much about Kenny McIntosh on this show, Tony. 126 total yards from scrimmage, almost even run and pass. Do you see him as like a mid-round kind of third down back type of guy that can kind of help an NFL team in kind of like a role?
McIntosh came into the season with huge grades from scouts, and he's been more of a flash player than a consistent guy. Had some huge runs from the line of scrimmage against Ohio State, which he's done all year long. Would have had the touchdown, except he tripped over the 5-yard line, if you remember that play. I think McIntosh has got to put it together. If he puts it together, he could be your quote-unquote feature runner at the next level.
Okay.
If not, he's going to be a guy that kind of meanders around and never lives up to expectations. He's got to put those performances that we saw against Ohio State. He's got to do that every single week because he's capable of it. And that's what scouts expect. I mean, he came into the season, despite the fact that he was a 2-bit, running back for Georgia in 2021, scouts expect him to be a top 60 pick. He's got top 60 potential as far as the physical skills. He shows the flashes. I don't know if the consistency's there. I think in a deep running back class, you're looking maybe late third round with McIntosh.
Yeah, but a team could get somebody that could really help him in a role, with all that ability. You can usually find running backs late, especially in a deep class. It's going to be, I think you'll probably see a couple day 2 running backs go in this draft, Tony, that end up being really good pros, like really, really good pros.
Absolutely. And day 2 running backs or second round running backs who should probably be first round running backs or would have been first round running backs 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, no question about it. Couple of the guys. How about Stetson Bennett? Give him credit.
Yeah.
Georgia's not rolling out, Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle and all these guys. They have good receivers, but these aren't, first round, top 10 pick type guys. The fact that he's done what he's done this year, I know he's an older prospect, and that's going to scare some people away too. He's going to find his way onto an NFL roster.
I think he's the type of guy that would be a very good number 3 quarterback in the NFL. He's the type of guy that he's just worth having as an extra set of eyeballs on the sidelines to, basically go over with what he sees. He's going to get a chance to compete. If he's drafted, it's going to be very late. He doesn't have the physical skills, but it's like the guy from TCU that we're going to talk about. He just finds ways to win. And when his team needs it, in desperate situations, he pulls the rabbit out of his hat. And there's something to be said for that at the quarterback position.
Yeah, no question about it. Anybody else from this game you want to highlight before we move on to the other matchup, Tone?
I thought Steele Chambers, the linebacker, played relatively well from Ohio State. I mean, he is your classic 4-3 weak side linebacker. He's very athletic. There were a couple times where he dropped off the line, went 30 yards downfield with receivers. He goes sideline to sideline. Underclassman, who I'm told is going to enter the draft. I would expect him to be a second-round pick. And their other linebacker, Tommy Eichenberg. He's not as athletic as Chambers, but man, he packs a wallop. He is a tough run defender with terrific instincts. I think you're looking at Eichenberg, if he enters the draft, as a middle round choice.
Interesting. All right, let's go to the other game. Not quite as many prospects that are going to go pro in the TCU Michigan game, Tony, as there were in Georgia, Ohio State, two of the premier, pro football factories in college football. But it was an excellent game. It was up and down. Michigan can never kind of get into how they wanted to, usually try to win these games. Missing their top running back Corum, I think probably has something to do with that too. So your thoughts on the game in general, and where would you like to start?
Well, I mean, the game was great. It was back and forth. And every time, you thought Michigan had the upper hand and they were about to dominate the game as everyone expected to, TCU had an answer. And TCU had an answer because they have a quarterback in Max Duggan who people say, well, Tim Tebow, I disagree with that. He's a guy who had a lot of offensive coordinators, had a couple of head coaches at TCU, yet all he does is win. He was a guy
hard issue, right?
Exactly. He came into the season as the backup quarterback, yet, he basically grabbed hold of that starting position and finds ways to win.
You know who he reminds me of, Tony? I'm going to throw a name out at you. Jeff Garcia.
It's a little bit bigger and stouter than Garcia, but he is athletic. He's got a terrific arm. He has that ability to make plays with his legs like Jeff Garcia. He's going to be, people are going to pick holes in his game, Max Duggan, throughout the scouting process. When you compare him to Stetson Bennett, I think Max Duggan has a chance to really produce on the next level because of the physical skills, because of the arm strength, because of the foot speed compared to, say, Stetson Bennett, who is a good pair of eyes. Plus, like I said, with Bennett, he finds ways to win. I mean, every time you thought this year, whether it be against Michigan, whether it be against Kansas State, whoever else, every time, TCU was counted for dead, they rise up and they win. And it's largely in part because of the play of the quarterback.
All right. Yeah, 100%. I'm with you. And one guy he was throwing to in this game was Quentin Johnston. Had a big game. Almost all his yards came on two plays, one a blown coverage, the other a shallow cross where he broke one tackle, and then whoop, the speed took over. Your thoughts on Johnston? We even talked about him a ton. We did a little bit last week, but not a ton. I watched him a little bit today. I'll give you my take second. But your thoughts on the game Johnston played and kind of where he stands in this wide receiver class?
I think he helped himself in a sense because he was going up against DJ Turner a lot, and that was a real good battle to watch. And DJ Turner, the cornerback from Michigan, who I don't know if he's officially entered the draft, but the word is he's going to enter the draft. He could be a late first-round pick. He doesn't have the size of Quentin Johnston, but he's got outstanding ball skills. So that was a good matchup. As far as Johnson's concerned, he's got the size, he's got the speed. People are going to fall in love with him. I think the thing with Johnson is you got to watch the route running at the combine and take as much out of that as you can, because he's got to learn. It can't be another Big 12 receiver that just wins because of size and speed. He's got to find other ways to separate. I thought his route running was surprisingly nice or surprisingly good during the game against Michigan. But when you go to the NFL, it's next level. That's the big thing with Johnson. Has had his share of drops in the throughout the 2022 season, but this is a wide open receiver class, so it's very possible that Quentin Johnston could end up as the first receiver selected.
Yeah, he could be, Tony. This is what I wrote down. I watched him this morning. I watched all his explosive plays, and I watched some other things from him as well, just to get a feel for him. I'm curious to see if he actually measures out at 6'4". Like if he comes in at 6'2.5" or 6'3", that wouldn't shock me. I want to see that. I think for a guy his size, he's good at making guys miss after the catch. He's had some pretty explosive runs after the catch, and he's made some guys, miss. As you pointed out, he has good speed. Not sure it's elite speed, but it's good speed. The route running, I think he glides sometimes. Basically it stops, goes, and then either crosses or slants. That's kind of what he runs. not the best route runner. And the one thing that I made a big note of at the end of something you just brought up, he lets the ball get into his body a lot. He's not a hands catcher. And I think we see, especially in some of those plays in the middle of the field, plays that he should make, he kind of lets the ball get into his body a little bit, gets his eye off of it, and that's when you get some of those drops.
Get some of those drops, so you got to basically readjust yourself and take your time to get back to running after the catch because you're kind of off balance. So, yeah, I mean, he needs work on it. I don't think there's a huge difference between him being 6'4" and 6'3", especially if he's going to be, over 212 pounds and he's going to run in the 4.3s. But it's those little things. And I mean, we've seen time again, the Hakeem Butlers of the world, all these other guys from the Big 12, these big, fast, physical receivers who have to now learn to separate through route running, have to learn to catch the ball with their hands away from their frame. It's not an easy adjustment. A lot of times it doesn't work out.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say too, Tone, when I went back and I watched, I sort and I watched all his contested catch attempts, I thought they'd be more. For a guy with that size and athleticism, I thought they'd be more, reaching over the defender, taking the ball away, going up for 50-50 balls and catching them. I didn't see as much as that as I thought I would when I went through the tape.
And it's interesting because, again, people will grade him as a top 10 pick based off the flash plays, based off the highlights. But, when you really get deep into the film, Kelee Ringo, who we talked about just before, you start to see these red flags, and that's what scouts and teams are going to be looking at.
And here's a name I didn't hear a whole lot about until I started prepping for the game. And, then I watched the game, and it's impossible not to notice him. Dylan Horton, the defensive end for TCU, Tony, 3 sacks in the game, if I'm not mistaken, right? Your thoughts on him, what you saw from him in the game, and where he might be and how he might be viewed by scouts for the draft.
Coming into the season, Dylan Horton was graded as a late round, 7th round pick. I put a 5th round grade on him. Dylan Horton is a legit 6'3.5", 263 pounds. He runs and plays in the 4.7s. It's a matter of him getting off of blocks and getting to the quarterback. I think against Michigan, basically you had, the big uglies against the quick, explosive defenders. That's why Dylan Horton was able to get an advantage. I mean, the left tackle, Hayes, for Michigan's a pretty good, is actually a good prospect, but Dylan Horton is very quick. He's very explosive. He's very athletic. It's just a matter of him putting it together. Now he's got to, granted, you got the game, he's going to go up against Roderick Jones of Georgia, so he's going to have another real opportunity, another challenge on Monday for to show that the game against Michigan was not the exception to the rule. He's got a lot of upside potential. It's just a matter of him, hitting that and playing to that potential, that upside week in and week out. I am not surprised. I had written about it I thought he was very underrated, but it's a matter of him playing at that level week in and week out. Not saying 3 sacks every week he needs, but I'm saying got to get that pressure. Got to show that you can stay on your feet. Got to show that you can penetrate the line of scrimmage. And if you're not getting the sack, at least cause the quarterback to move his feet, move out of the pocket.
Yeah, we've talked about Michigan prospects a lot, Tony. So anyone really jump out at you based on their performance in this game that we maybe haven't discussed or maybe change some of what you're thinking about some guys?
I mean, Schmeelk I thought was very good till he got injured. Obviously, Ronnie Bell. It's interesting, Ronnie Bell came into the season graded almost 4 rounds later than his teammate Cornelius Johnson. But I think if you're looking at it right now, Ronnie Bell, the receiver, is going to be selected earlier than Cornelius Johnson. He's a little bit shorter, but he's more explosive. He's faster. You can use him as a return specialist. He's come up in huge spots consistently for Michigan this year. He catches the ball very well. He's a tough receiver. He finds ways to separate. I think Ronnie Bell had a decent game. He's had a real good season. Yeah. And I think he's moved ahead of his teammate, Cornelius Johnson, who was much higher rated coming into the year.
And one of the guys I want to bring up is we've talked about him before, Oluwatimi, their center. They had all sorts of snap issues late in that game, Michigan, like where everyone's moving, but the ball doesn't get snapped. There seemed to be something going on with that offensive line where they weren't in sync.
Which is unusual for Michigan. Here's the thing with Oluwatimi, and he's a great story. He's an easy guy to root for. But go back to what we said with Kelee Ringo or even Quentin Johnson. When you really get into the film, there's a lot of red flags there. I mean, he's not a powerful power gap blocker. He's not overly athletic, so you can't use him in a zone scheme. I think Oluwatimi is a late round, 7th round choice. I think people are overrating him now. When you really get into the film, you see a guy who is potentially maxed out. I don't know. He's got great upside, would be an asset to have as a backup, but he's not an early draft pick. One other guy I got to talk about, somebody I've liked for the past 3 years, Trevius Hodgins-Tomlinson, the cornerback from TCU, who had a terrific game. I mean, he is a feisty little cornerback. I'll get into that, with outstanding ball skills, good hands for the interception, has a knack for the big play, terrific ball skills. The problem is he's 5'7.5". So it doesn't mean that he's not going to play at the next level, but what it means is he's probably not going to be a top 100 pick, because everybody wants those cornerbacks to be 6 foot tall to guard against the 6'2.5", 6'3" receivers, Quentin Johnson. But I thought Hodges-Tomlinson played well. He's played well the past 3 years. If you watch TCU and you break down the TCU film, as I've said about Hodges-Tomlinson, if he was 3 inches taller, he's a top 50 pick. But at 5'7.5", there's just not a big market for those types of guys come NFL draft time, because they project to dime backs on Sunday.
Yeah, no question about it. And by the way, I want to, and it reminds me of a guy we talked about last year, Tony, and the guy's first name is escaping me. It's trying to look it up. It's killing me. The small kid out of Houston, Jones, who ended up getting drafted by the Patriots.
Marcus Jones.
Dang, I kept thinking it was Nathan Jones for some reason. Marcus Jones.
Right.
And he was another guy, right? I think he was 5'9", like
right.
160 pounds or something like that.
Right.
He's been great for the Patriots this year, because if you watch his tape last year, his tape was phenomenal. I know he had shoulder issues too, right, heading into the draft.
He did at the end of the season, right?
But boy, that's, he's a guy that got, I think, in the 4th or 5th round, and that's what you just said about that corner reminds me of what we were saying about Jones last year.
Yeah, and it's going to be a similar situation. Hodgins-Tomlinson is going to have to be in a scheme with a coach that knows how to use him. He's not a plug and play type of guy, but he can absolutely play. Probably had some special teams elements to him, as Marcus Jones did, although Marcus Jones really showed a lot of special teams ability at Houston.
All right, let's go through some of the other early declarations and some of the other games, Tony. We'll kind of go through the games, and then anything else you want to bring up, you can. Clemson, Tennessee, a lot of luster off this game. These are the guys that did not play in it. But one guy that did declare from Clemson, Brian Brzee, he will head into the draft. I watched him today. Really good quickness, I felt like, kind of off the snap, really kind of shifty side to side. But for a guy that's 300 pounds, I didn't see as much power as I thought I would watching him over the course of the year.
I think you got to go back and watch the 2021 film with Brzee, because he was a load to handle in the middle of the line. Remember, had some personal issues earlier in the year when I believe his 15-year-old sister died of brain cancer. Yeah. So obviously, there were a lot of things going on in his life. The fact that he played in the game, I think bodes well. He deserves a lot of credit for that. I do think he's going to be an early pick, a top 12 pick. He's got size. He's athletic. He did show the power a year ago, just a little bit off his game this year. A lot of people liked him coming into the year. And I understand why he entered the draft. I think he's going to be a very early pick. Also, he's got some scheme versatility. I think you can use him in 3 or 4 man lines.
Yeah, he played a lot of nose this year. He plays in 3 techniques, so he did both things. You're right. I just made a note. Look at 2021 tape for him. I'll do that a little later on today if I can find the time here. Thank you for that, Tone. Anyone else from Clemson, Tennessee that we haven't really discussed much that you want to bring up, or you're good?
No, most of those guys sat on the sidelines. Yep. Most of them, the guys are opted out, and there's really, I guess the big news from the Clemson game is they moved on from the quarterback, which we all knew that they would, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with DJ and now at Oregon State. Moving forward, considered some people, including yours truly, thought so highly of him after those 2 games he filled in for Trevor Lawrence in 2020.
All right, you talk, Tony, about it. You get the avalanche of Ohio State players declaring after the game. We haven't gotten that yet, but we did get an avalanche of Alabama players declaring for the NFL draft after that bowl game. And I'm sure those Ohio State players will be shortly. Maybe they've done it during the show. Who knows? So we had Bryce Young, who we talked about a million times on the show. He was, again, unbelievable, Tony. He's going to be the first quarterback taken. He's probably going to be the first overall pick. And I don't think either one of us has a problem with that, despite the fact his size and measurables aren't great. We've done that a million times. We've talked about Jahmyr Gibbs, maybe not big enough to be a 20-carry game feature back, but certainly a guy that can split the load, good pass receiver. He declared. Will Anderson declared, and then a couple of guys we haven't talked a bunch about, Brian Branch and Eli Ricks, 2 defensive backs. So why don't you take us through those 3 defenders, because I don't think we've done a ton of stuff on those guys quite yet. We did a lot of Anderson last week. So give me a focus on Branch and Ricks on how scouts are looking at those guys?
A Branch is a dominant safety. I mean, he plays a safety position with cornerback type ball skills. He's explosive. He defends the run well. He's got terrific speed, both in a straight line and sideline to sideline. Coming into the season, off of the 2021 film, when he was rotated into the lineup, I had him as a third round choice. I think he's a guy who could break into the first round. He is that good. He's all he's cropped up to be, although sometimes Alabama safeties have not really have panned out at the next level. He's got size. He's explosive. You can place him over the slot receiver, and he's not going to be a liability. Really like his game. Can't say the same thing for Eli Ricks. Eli Ricks is sort of a poor man's Keely Ringo. I know people absolutely love him. Transfer from LSU. A flash guy that has a lot of lapses. And I really got to delve deeper into the film with Ricks. If I was advising him, I would have said, go back for another season, put it all together, and really elevate your draft stock. We'll see what happens moving forward. We saw Derek Stingley make a late rise up draft boards. I don't think Eli Ricks is going to be the third pick. I don't think he's going to be a first round pick. But again, he shows flashes, but there's not a lot of consistency with Eli Ricks. I know there are a lot of people in the Twitter draft world that love him. I'm not one of them.
All right, two other Alabama players that, unless I missed it, I don't think they've declared yet. Linebacker Henry To'o.
Right.
I think I have that right. And Byron Young as well. I know is a guy that some people like. Your thoughts on those two guys?
Now, when you say that they declared, they were seniors. They were seniors who basically they're entering the draft and they're not going to go back for a second senior season. Toto is the type of guy. He's a smaller guy, 6'1", 230, sort of your run and chase pursuit linebacker.
And by the way, just so people understand, they get the extra year because of the COVID year, so they could if they wanted to, but they're choosing to go in. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And this is going to end eventually because
thank God.
Crazy. Go back to what I said about Steel Chambers from Ohio State being your traditional 4-3 weak side linebacker. That's what Toto is. He's either a 4-3 weak side linebacker. You're going to put him on the inside of a 3-4 and let him run to the ball. Very instinctive, very fast, but not very big. And, struggles getting through the trash, struggles getting off blocks. Brian Young, right now, I have a 4th round grade on him. Your typical two-gap lineman from Alabama, a guy who doesn't make a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage, basically occupies the block, occupies gaps, occupies blockers. He's got good size. He's explosive. He's strong. Just a matter of, the team see him as a 3-4 end or a 4-3 tackle. I think he can play both, but I think he's more of your middle round type of player.
Their opponent was Kansas State, and that was another great game, by the way. Just a great week in college football. Deuce Vaughn is a guy I'll bring up, but then you can bring up anyone else you want to bring up from that Kansas State team. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, Deuce Vaughn, a little bit of a smaller back, but very explosive. I mean, we talked about McIntosh, with the long runs from the line of scrimmage. Deuce Vaughn does this every week. I mean, he's a smaller guy, but he's tough. He runs hard on the inside. He shows the agility and speed to turn the corner. I don't know that he's got the size or the ability to be a feature runner at the next level, but, who needs to be a feature runner in the NFL these days at 25 carries? Only a few teams do it like that. I was a little bit disappointed in the play of Julius Brents, who really, got smoked by Bryce Young throughout the game. But Julius,
cornerback, right?
The cornerback from Kansas State, 6'2.5", 202 pounds. He's going to test off the charts. He flashes athleticism. I think people talking about day 2. If it's day 2, I think it's going to be later in the 3rd round. I think he's a guy that you start off as a nickelback and you try and develop his game. He's got great upside, but there've been a lot of hurdles, a lot of bumps in the road for Brents. Really, not only against Alabama, but if you go back to that Big 12 title game against TCU, and Max Duggan had his issues against Quentin Johnson there, but well liked in the scouting community.
All right. Before we get to a couple other players that could be coming out here, one declaration and one that is a little bit more complicated. Any other bowl games that you want to focus on, Tony? Really pinpoint some players that maybe, made a statement, jumped out to you that you want to get to before we hit our final 2 players here.
No, I mean, the Illinois game was a good game to watch, but a lot of their top guys who were on the sidelines. It'll be interesting to see if Martin, the cornerback who came out of nowhere, enters the draft. The Penn State game really wasn't much of a game. Penn State, blew Utah's doors open. I thought Clifford, the quarterback from Penn State, played very well, although I don't think you got to look at his body of work, and he's more of a Stetson Bennett type of, is going to have to come in and compete to earn a roster spot. Their linebacker their tight end Strange, Penn State's tight end Strange, who declared for the draft, I thought had a very good game. He's a good pass catcher, sort of your move tight end who gives effort blocking, but he's got to improve his strength. I think Strange is a potential third-round choice. Thought he played very well against Utah.
Strong tight end class, right, Tony?
It's looking like except for the Notre Dame kid who will be a first-round pick. I think you're going to get a lot of good day 2 tight ends. And, we're speaking about tight ends. South Dakota State plays in the 1AA championship on Sunday. It's a nationally televised game. Watch the South Dakota State tight end Tucker Kraft, because this kid is outstanding. I want to say he could jump into the late part of round 1, but he is an exceptional downfield pass catcher who does a great job blocking. He's going to be the number 2 tight end off the board, Tucker Kraft, South Dakota State, if everything checks out. But just watch him Sunday in that 1AA, that FCS championship game when South Dakota State, I think they're playing North Dakota State, if memory serves me, because he is a legitimate early pick in the 2023 draft, an underclassman who was already declared, but he's staying with South Dakota State throughout the playoffs.
I wonder if he's gonna. So he can't go to the Senior Bowl, right? If he's an underclassman, I'm not sure if he's graduated or not.
Yeah, so, it depends on his graduation status as to whether or not
Shrine Game, maybe though. Who knows, right? Possible.
I don't know that the Shrine Game's inviting players that I may be wrong, but don't know that they're inviting underclassmen that haven't graduated.
Got it. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, Tony. Oh, I'm putting you on the spot with this, so I apologize if you're not prepared for it. And I forgot to put it in the rundown, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway. Tulane played a hell of a game against USC, man. I watched that game. It was fun. Anyone on Tulane, the team played that well this year. They beat USC. There's got to be some guys coming out that could be interested in the draft.
They actually have a couple of guys. Number one, their running back, Tyjae Spears, who has been phenomenal all year, and I've written about him all year, is entering the draft. He is going to the Senior Bowl. He has accepted an invitation. He's a smaller guy, but he's incredibly quick. He's creative. He's an outstanding pass catcher out of the backfield. I right now have him as an early 4th-round choice. I can absolutely see him moving into day 2 if he goes to the Senior Bowl and catches the ball exceptionally well and shows the ability, to make defenders, which I expect him to do. So Tyjae Spears, they got some late-round guys. They got a couple of cornerbacks. Excuse me as I look away from the camera here. A couple of guys, I should say, in the defensive back 7. Dorian Williams, an inside linebacker. Nick Anderson, an outside linebacker. 2 safeties, and Larry Brooks and Macon Clark. These are late-round draft picks, priority free agents who will, I think, absolutely have an opportunity to make a roster in the fall of 2023 on an NFL team as your 4th safety special teams player, as your 7th or 8th linebacker special teams player. So they've got a lot of feisty guys. Not the greatest athletes in the world as you got on USC, but guys that are tough, instinctive, and play all out on every down.
Kayshon Boutte changed his mind, Tony.
Yeah.
We talked about him going back to school last week. Oh, good, smart move. Get another week. Jaden Daniels is coming back. Figure you had a good, strong second half of the year. You build on it. Nope. It's coming out. Your thoughts?
I said earlier, it's a wide open receiver class, so I don't know how much that had to do with it. He did play much better the second half of the year than he did the first half of the year. He's basically C.J. Stroud magnified in the sense that we saw the second half of the season for Kayshon Boutte, what we expected to see from the word go in September. Now, whether that was him trying to get in tune with Jaden Daniels, because Jaden Daniels also played much better the second half of the season, I don't know. I think with a lot of these guys, Kayshon Boutte goes back and builds upon what he showed in 2021 and plays much better. Kayshon Boutte is a 1st-round pick. But I guess, now in today's NFL, when you're a player It's basically the race to the second contract because that's when you make the cash. And sometimes, even though everyone talks about first round picks, when you talk to players, you talk to agents, they're better off being a second round choice because they may not going to make as much money, but they're going to get to that second contract quicker. That may be part of his thinking. I think it's going to be an interesting evaluation. I always think it's difficult to draft a player when he's on his downside, when his best football has been behind him. That's the situation with Kayshon Boutte. I definitely think he's going to be a day 2 guy. Maybe he makes a late round charge up the board. People do a Derek Stingley type where people go back and look at the 2021 film where he made some incredible plays. And the one thing we know about LSU receivers is this: they usually turn out to be much better players on Sunday than they were on Saturday, and they were damn good players on Saturday.
Yeah, no question. I didn't think I'd be sitting here breaking down the $1.7 billion omnibus budget bill that passed Congress, but here we are. There was a little thing in there in the 6,000 pages, Tony, that makes it much more likely Andre Carter, who's a defensive end for Army, can play in the NFL next year. I'm not going to explain the details of it, but it's there. Trust me. Your thoughts on Carter, when he might get drafted, now that his the commitment to the military can get pushed back a little bit further?
Senior Bowl is going to be huge for him. I mean, Carter was a good player. Came into the season graded as a second-round prospect by scouts. He's an athletic guy. They use him as a pass rusher. They use him off the line of scrimmage. Didn't play against the Army's schedule is the Georgia States of the world and teams like that. I think they played Holy Cross as well. So, the Senior Bowl is going to be huge for him. I still think he's more of a day 3 choice. There are some scouts that like him in day 2. If he shows pass rush ability at the Senior Bowl in those one-on-ones, the Senior Bowl Shrine Game are kingmakers at the quarterback position, at the cornerback position. And if you can rush the passer, you can really improve your stock at both the Senior Bowl and Shrine Game. So, got to see what he does in those one-on-ones. If he's able to get pressure up the field, if he's able to beat those offensive tackles, he's really going to help himself.
Finally, Tony, before we say goodbye, give me some broad stroke thoughts on the national championship game, which takes place next Monday.
I mean, you look at it on paper and you say, Georgia's going to win by 14, 21 points, but, how can you dismiss TCU? I mean, some of the matchups, obviously Keely Ringo against Quentin Johnson. We mentioned Broderick Jones against the TCU pass rushers.
Dylan Morton.
Kenny, one guy from TCU we didn't mention, D. Winters, the inside linebacker who had a terrific game against Kenny McIntosh. I mentioned Tre'Davious Hodges Tomlinson. See how he does against the Georgia receivers and Stetson Bennett. Obviously, Georgia's got a star in the making with their tight end. Have to see how D. Winters matches up against that. I mean, you got to think, you got to like on paper Georgia, but how many people thought that Michigan was going to win? So don't count out TCU. I just hope we see a good game.
Yeah, TCU showing a lot of guts this year, Tony. We count them out. They keep winning. So hopefully it'll be a fun game. If that game is anything close to some of the games we saw last weekend, I think we'll all be very happy with that. Absolutely. Happy New Year, my friend.
Same to you. Same to all the viewers.
Absolutely. For Tony Pauline, check out his work, by the way, Pro Football Network. I am John Schmeelk. Thanks for being with us for an episode of Draft Season. It was all brought to you by Tommy Hilfiger, a PVH brand, an official partner of the New York Giants. Don't forget to go download the Giants TV streaming app. It's for free on Roku, Apple TV, those other streaming services. Check it out. You can find this show and all other video content as well. For Tony, I'm Schmeelk. We'll see you next time. It's Draft Season.